They fired me to protect my sister's promotion. I was humiliated and discarded like a piece of trash. But what they didn't know, for 5 long years, I'd been quietly buying the very company they worked for. Just when they thought they'd seen the last of me, I walked back into their boardroom as their boss. And the best part, my ex-business partner, who I thought was dead, showed up with a secret that could destroy everything. But I was ready for him too. But before I dive into this wild story of reclaiming my power from those who I never thought would snatch it from me, subscribe and let me know what time it is where you're watching from.
What would you do if your own family turned against you for their own gain? That's exactly where I found myself. One minute I had a stable job, a place I belonged. The next minute I was being escorted out of the office by security, clutching a box of my things, listening to my former best friend tell me, "It's nothing personal, Mike, it's just business." I wish I could say it didn't hurt, but it pierced through me in a way no stranger's betrayal ever could. It wasn't just a job, it was my future, my pride, and most of all, it was my family. Except they didn't feel like family anymore. To fully understand what happened, you need to know about the people I trusted most. My sister Ashley, my uncle Richard, and Todd, my closest friend since high school. Growing up, Ashley and I were inseparable. If someone told me 10 years ago she'd stab me in the back, I would have laughed in their face. And Todd, he was the kind of friend you share everything with, dreams, failures, even fears. That's why I couldn't see it coming. My uncle Richard, as much as I respected him as the CEO of our family's company, was always tough to read. He valued results over relationships, and that became painfully clear the day he called me into his office. "We have to make some changes," Richard had said, leaning back in his leather chair, his tone cold and measured. "Ashley is better positioned for the promotion at this time. It's nothing personal, Mike." Those words echoed in my head as I sat there, stunned. Better positioned? How? Ashley had spent most of her career in marketing, while I worked day and night building the department I managed. I brought in clients, handled the numbers, hell, I even worked weekends when nobody else would. I couldn't believe my own uncle was siding with her. But the final blow came when I realized Todd was part of it too. After Richard broke the news, Todd came to me as if he cared. "I didn't think it would go down like this," he said, avoiding eye contact. "But Ashley convinced Richard you were a threat to her position. She said you'd hold her back as long as you were here." A threat? I couldn't even breathe. This was my sister, my baby sister. I'd been her biggest supporter, her cheerleader. I'd never competed with her, never even thought to. But the look in Todd's eyes told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just the messenger. He had backed her. He had helped pave the way for my exit because apparently loyalty to me was worth less than climbing another rung up the corporate ladder. Being blindsided like that strips something away from you. I felt humiliated. Not just because I lost my job, but because of how it happened. My entire team had been told before I was. They each avoided my gaze as I walked through the office that day. I could feel their pity. A security guard, not even someone I knew, was tasked with walking me to my car. I don't remember what he said when he handed me my box, but it felt patronizing. And maybe the worst part, Ashley didn't even say goodbye. She just stood at the end of the hallway, talking to Todd like none of it mattered. Betrayal like that doesn't just bruise your ego or break your heart. It can sink you into a dark place. Research actually shows that betrayal by family or close friends is one of the hardest forms of relational pain to recover from. It isn't the same as being hurt by a stranger. The trust you place in the people you love runs deeper, so when they turn on you, the wound feels sharper, and oftentimes the damage runs longer. I now know this from both experience and perspective, but in those first few weeks, all I felt was anger and shame. But here's what they didn't know. While they congratulated Ashley for getting my promotion and laughed about how efficient Todd had been as their little pawn, I was already one step ahead. Well, 5 years ahead, to be exact. You see, I'd never put all my faith in the company as it was, at least not since my 20s. Back then, when my uncle wouldn't discuss including me in any future plans, I started buying shares quietly. It wasn't revenge at the time, it was practicality. But suddenly, that decision became my greatest weapon. With every paycheck, every bonus, every smart investment,
I'd been stacking shares in the names of partners and trusts, slowly tightening my grip on the company my family worked for, yet undervalued me in. The betrayal? That was just the match that lit the fire. What they did wasn't the end of me. It was only the beginning. And while Ashley and Todd celebrated their victory, they had no idea what was waiting for them just around the corner.
That's when I decided this wasn't going to end with me losing.
Imagine walking into a room filled with people who betrayed you and knowing in that moment that you own it all. That's exactly what I did. For 5 years, I had bided my time, waited, planned, and watched from the shadows. The day finally came when all those years of quiet effort culminated into a single moment. The mandatory board meeting I called at 7:01 p.m., under my real name. It was the perfect setup. Everyone was present. Ashley, Todd, my Uncle Richard. None of them had any idea what was coming. The room went still the second I walked in. Ashley looked at me like she was seeing a ghost, her mouth slightly open as if she might protest but couldn't find the words. Todd, sitting to her right, froze with his glass halfway to his lips, his hand trembling just enough for everyone to notice. And Richard, the man who'd once told me I was dispensable, narrowed his eyes at me, his disbelief giving way to suspicion almost instantly. I stood there, letting the silence sit, letting them take it all in. One by one, their expressions shifted, from confusion to realization, and finally, panic. "Mike," Richard started, his voice low, attempting to regain some control. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile they remembered. It was measured, controlled, a mirror of their own tactics. "What am I doing here?" I replied. "I'm here because I own this company. 72% to be precise." The reactions were priceless. Ashley's jaw dropped completely. Todd actually set his glass down, fingers fumbling around the stem like he didn't trust himself not to drop it. Richard leaned forward in his chair, his hands gripping the table so hard I thought the wood might crack. They were scrambling, mentally searching for a loophole, a misstep, a reason they could dismiss my claim as impossible. But there wasn't one. I pulled out copies of the acquisition paperwork, laid them neatly on the long boardroom table before them, and let the weight of reality sink in. "I know what you're all thinking," I said calmly. "How? When? Why?" Let me make it simple for you. For 5 years, I've been buying shares through trusts, shell companies, any avenue I could find. I didn't do it because I wanted to hurt anyone. Initially, I did it because I didn't trust my position in this company, and clearly I was right. But when you betrayed me, Ashley, when you convinced our uncle to fire me, and Todd, when you ensured my exit, it made my choice even clearer. And now, here we are. I'm not the IT guy you threw out. Correction, I was your IT guy. Now I'm the reason your paycheck exists. The room exploded into noise. Ashley stood up, her voice raised, demanding answers, as though she were still the one in power. "You can't just come back here and sit down," I interrupted. My voice was steady, sharp. It cut through her outrage like a blade. "That is no longer how this works." Todd, ever the opportunist, tried to pivot. "Look, Mike, I didn't want to." "Stop," I said, cutting him off. "Spare me the excuses. You chose your side 5 years ago, and now I'm choosing mine." Over the course of the next hour, I laid everything out. I fired Todd on the spot. His severance package had been finalized a week earlier, anticipating this exact moment. I told Ashley to pack her things by the end of the day. And Richard, after confronting him with documents proving years of questionable decisions that had put the company at financial risk, I stripped him of his CEO title. The entire board was made aware of the changes before they even had time to blink. I wasn't just there to prove a point. I was there to correct the wrongs they'd ignored. For Ashley, though, it was personal. It wasn't just about the promotion, was it? I said, staring her down as she sat silently, pale and shaken. You couldn't stand the idea of me being in your way. And look at where that got you. But this wasn't just a moment of theatrics. It was the result of 5 years of meticulous planning. I had anticipated every possible way they might try to block me. I had watched their moves, studied their habits, and made sure that once I took control, there would be no loopholes left for anyone to exploit. Even the timing of my announcement, late in the evening when their energy was low and their judgment slower, was calculated. As I stood at the head of that boardroom table, I could see the shock slowly transform into resignation in their eyes. I had won. At least, that's what I thought. The satisfaction was undeniable, but while I fired Todd and sent Ashley home for good, I noticed something in Richard's expression that didn't sit well. It wasn't just defeat. There was something else. A glint of persistence. A hint that this wasn't over for him. I had claimed my victory, but I wasn't naive enough to think they'd all stay down. Betrayal runs deeper than just hurt feelings. It's fueled by pride, and I could feel their pride simmering beneath the surface. I had taken the boardroom, but the fight wasn't over. As I walked out of the meeting that night, finalized contracts in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was just getting started.
What happens when your enemies refuse to stay down? I learned the hard way that some people don't accept defeat, even when it's staring them in the face. A few days after I reclaimed control of the company, the retaliation from Ashley and Todd began. It started with a string of anonymous threats sent to my work email, cryptic but clear enough to know who they were from. Messages like, "You don't belong here," and "Just wait, this isn't over." It could have been laughable if it didn't also include actual attempts to scare me out of my position. One evening, when I returned to my condo, I knew someone had been there. Papers shuffled, drawers left slightly open. Strangely, nothing was stolen, but I found my old key card to the office lying in the center of my coffee table. That's when I knew it wasn't just a message. They were sending me a warning. I immediately had the locks changed and increased security at my building, but the psychological impact stuck with me. It wasn't just about revenge for them anymore. It was about breaking me. I could see it coming. They wanted to chip away at me until I was too paranoid or exhausted to hold my ground. And as much as I hated to admit it, those words they sent, "You don't belong here," lingered. Not because they were true, but because they reminded me of what I'd been up against for years. My own family doubting me, my best friend betraying me. Their tactics might have shifted, but the intent had stayed the same. It didn't stop there. A few weeks later, Ashley and Todd decided to go public with their fight. They called for an emergency shareholder meeting, presenting what they claimed was evidence of fraud on my part. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension they had brewed. Discreet conversations among members of the board, all of them glancing at me as though expecting some grand revelation. Ashley stood confidently, her tone sharp as she laid out her so-called evidence. She pulled up a file allegedly showing vulnerabilities in my acquisition of the company. It was impressive, I'll admit. The kind of presentation that might have swayed someone who didn't know the full story. But here's the thing about Ashley. For all her ambition, she's reckless. I had spent years anticipating moves like this, carefully documenting every step of my acquisitions to ensure I hadn't left a door open for someone like her. In fact, I'd planted that exact file in our system weeks earlier, knowing it would be too tempting for her to ignore. It was labeled ownership vulnerability, the kind of bait Ashley wouldn't hesitate to sink her teeth into. When she displayed it in the meeting, I waited for her to get through her entire argument before I stood up and spoke. "Ashley," I said, my voice calm but firm, "it's always interesting to see you work so hard on something you didn't fully understand." Confusion flickered across her face. She hadn't expected me to stay collected. That's when I revealed what she didn't know. The file she pulled, the very foundation of her argument,
wasn't real. It was a decoy I had planted, and to ensure there was no chance of denial on her part, I had even included a breadcrumb trail of metadata proving she accessed and manipulated it. I played a short audio recording of her voice, captured accidentally during one of her private calls, discussing ways to get around Mike before he shuts us out for good. The room fell quiet. The board members, who had been whispering amongst themselves, now looked at Ashley with a mix of shock and disappointment. Todd, who had sided with her yet again, shook his head as though trying to distance himself from her failure. Watching it all unfold felt surreal, like I was finally restoring balance to something that had been broken for too long. But turning the tables like that wasn't just about defending my position. It was about showing them, and everyone else in that room, that I wasn't someone they could manipulate anymore. Research shows that enduring repeated sabotage and betrayal can take a heavy psychological toll, but it also builds resilience in ways you don't expect. That's where I found myself. The version of me they had fired years ago wouldn't have been able to handle this, but now I knew how to stand my ground even when the people around me tried to undermine it. The fallout from Ashley's failed coup was swift. Her credibility with the board was shattered, and with Todd's support dwindling fast, their alliance crumbled. I tightened my control over the company, removing anyone who had even a minor role in their schemes. But as much as I wanted to feel relief, it didn't come. Instead, I found myself looking over my shoulder. They had been willing to stoop low before. What was stopping them now? And then, just as I thought the dust might settle, something happened that caught me completely off guard. Someone from my past, someone I hadn't seen in over a decade, reappeared with a claim that threatened to overshadow everything. Not just my company, but the life I had carefully rebuilt.
What would you do if someone you thought was long gone, someone you believed was dead, suddenly came back with a plan to destroy you? That's the question I faced when Daniel Carter, my former business partner, reappeared after 15 years. The day started like any other. I'd finally begun to feel like I could breathe again after neutralizing Ashley and Todd's attempts to take me down. But when I walked into my office that morning and saw Daniel sitting there, casually leaning back in the chair across from my desk, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. It wasn't just his presence, it was the way he smiled, like he already knew he held the upper hand. I hadn't even fully processed that he was alive when he dropped the bombshell. "I'm here to claim what's mine," he said plainly, sliding a manila envelope across the desk toward me. 49% of your company. Legally mine, thanks to an account I set up 15 years ago that, as it turns out, funded your little shell company. His words hit me like a freight train. Daniel Carter, the man I once trusted to help me build everything from nothing. We were just two broke tech nerds back then, working out of a storage unit, coding day and night to create the platform that would eventually become the foundation of this empire. Daniel was brilliant, I'll give him that, but he hated playing the long game. He wanted shortcuts, easy wins. When things didn't go his way, he pushed boundaries, cut corners, and took risks that I couldn't afford to be associated with. That's how we ended up parting ways. One day, he packed up and left without a word. A year later, I heard he had died during a trip overseas. At least that's what everyone said. And now here he was, alive and determined to dismantle everything I'd worked for. I opened the envelope, but I didn't let him see my reaction. It was a copy of the original account he had set up all those years ago, along with his supposed proof that it had funded the trust I'd been using to buy shares of the company. His implications were clear. If this went public, it wouldn't just cost me my position, it could destroy my reputation entirely. "You thought I was gone, didn't you?" he asked, his voice laced with amusement. 15 years, Mike. You've had a good run, but now it's time for me to cash in. You've built this on my contributions, and I'm taking my share. His confidence would have been intimidating if I hadn't been preparing for this exact moment. Because while Daniel thought he was the one doing the surprising, the truth is, I'd been one step ahead of him for months. Some part of me had always wondered if he might resurface. A man like him doesn't just disappear forever. I spent years tracking down old leads, following crumbs that suggested he was still out there, offshore accounts, quiet investments in obscure places. 6 months ago, I found it, the very account he was now boasting about. And instead of waiting for him to make the first move, I bought it. Every document, every connection he thought he had. Owned by me. So I let him talk. I let him spin his threats, lay out his so-called leverage, all while he had no idea he was sitting across from someone who had already crippled him. When he finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive, placing it carefully on the desk. "This," he said, tapping it with his finger, "contains everything I need to destroy you. I'm giving you a chance to walk away quietly."
I leaned back in my chair, staring at him for a moment before replying. You really think you still have control, don't you, Daniel? I said. You always did underestimate me. Something flickered across his face, confusion, uncertainty. That's when I revealed the truth. The account you're so proud of, the one you think ties me to you? I've owned it for 6 months. Every asset, every connection, every shred of evidence you think you have, it's gone. You used a dead man's account, Daniel, and I used it to bury you.
The shift in his demeanor was instant. Confidence unraveled into disbelief as he struggled to process what I'd just said. That's impossible, he stammered, reaching for the envelope as though the pieces of paper in it would somehow contradict me. No, it's not, I replied. You bet on my blind spots, but I didn't have any. You spent 15 years planning your move. I spent 15 years preparing for this exact moment. You're done. There was nothing left for him to say. With Daniel neutralized, his claims meant nothing. Legally, he no longer had a path back into the company, and as for his threats, the flash drive quickly became irrelevant. He left the office that day a deflated man, his grand plan falling apart before it could even begin. But as I watched him walk away, I wasn't filled with triumph. If anything, I felt the weight of how far I'd come and what I'd sacrificed to get here. Daniel may have been the last ghost from my past to surface, but he was also a reminder. The road to where I was standing wasn't just paved with victories. It was filled with lessons, ones I wouldn't soon forget.
Looking back, what started as betrayal became the foundation for something greater. I turned humiliation into strategy, silently building my empire while my enemies underestimated me. The very people who cast me aside never saw the patience and precision I wielded until it was too late. That's the lesson here. Setbacks don't define you. Your response does. If you've ever faced betrayal or been underestimated, remember this. Resilience and strategy are your greatest tools. Let my story inspire you to reclaim your path, no matter the odds. And before you go, like, subscribe, and comment what's stopping you from taking control of your own story.